I had a completely different plan for what I was going to build. But as soon as I laid eyes on this walnut slab, I had a really distinct vision for something brand new. And I figured if I'm going to spend hundreds of dollars and several months of my life working on a project, I might as well chase the one that feels the most exciting and fulfilling. I'm Claire, welcome to my channel, and let's jump in. So I don't know if you guys can see the vision just yet, but as soon as I laid eyes on this slab, I immediately thought it looked like a mushroom cap. It has all these really beautiful colors and wobbles, and since I need a coffee table for my living room anyways, a giant mushroom just seemed like the natural decision. I couldn't wait to get my hands on this piece, so the first thing I'm doing is prepping the slab. That means stripping away anything that might crumble and start to flake off over time. I'm using a chisel to remove any bark, and sandpaper and a wire brush to remove the flaky layers. Any sharp, really unsafe edges are being sanded down, but I'm doing everything I can to retain these natural curves. This piece is a Clara walnut base with an English walnut graft, and one of my favorite parts about this piece is just all the different tones in it. You get some of that classic deep walnut brown, an almost zebra stripe section, some lighter patches, and this sweet, warm orange ring. So I ended up getting cherry wood for the base because I wanted to accentuate these warm tones while still adding some contrast to the piece. The base is made of a bunch of these thick circles that are stacked on top of each other. So first I need to make a bunch of circles and then flatten them so they stack properly. I'm starting with the jointer to flatten the bottom face of the board and the planer to make the top face parallel. I'm also running the edge of the board along the jointer to create a perfectly 90-degree corner. Next, I'm cutting a bunch of half circles with the jigsaw, and before you roast me, I am well aware that this is not how a jigsaw should normally be used. But I have some plans for the offcuts, so I'm trying to preserve as much wood as possible, which would be really difficult on the bandsaw that we have at the shop. After gluing the semicircle pairs together, I have to reflatten them so they don't topple over, using a combination of hand sanding, the planer, and the CNC. So while I show you that, this is probably the point where I should tell you that I don't really know what I'm doing. If you couldn't tell by my questionable jigsaw skills, I am still very new to woodworking. At the start of this project, I had a solid 6 months of experience under my belt and only made a handful of things, but I just felt so compelled to make this from the moment it came into my brain. And if there's one thing I will do, it's follow my artistic vision far past my current skill set. I truly believe that trying new things, challenging yourself, and asking for help is the best way to learn. And I genuinely really surprise myself with what I do when I just trust myself and trust my vision. Okay, so now all the pieces are flattened so they can be stacked like so. Before gluing, I'm taking some of the pieces to the router table to remove excess material so I have less to remove while I'm grinding. After the glue up, here we are. Please trust the process here. While that glue cures, we're going to get started on epoxy pouring. I am not doing a flood coat of epoxy, but I am using epoxy to fill in these hairline cracks around the edges to stabilize them and prevent future splitting. I used tuck tape to create a dam around each crack and went to mixing. Truthfully, I just tried going low and slow with this, adding small amounts of epoxy in the cracks to let that harden and not overload and overheat the tape. After that, I used the heat gun to pop the air bubbles and just let that marinate in my bedroom while it cured. I did try to set up a fume hood to reduce vapor exposure, but it honestly did not do anything. And I eventually moved the setup to an empty room in my apartment where I should have done this all in the first place. So while the epoxy is curing, I was able to go back to the base and get started on the power carving. I'll be honest, it was really intimidating to work with such large, intense tools. The first tool I'm using is the angle grinder. The angle grinder strips back large chunks of material with each swipe. This tool works really aggressively, so the ratchet straps keep everything into place, and holding it up against my torso allows me to use the strength of my trunk to keep the tool really comfortably in my control. A big thing about using this is making sure that you aren't using too much pressure. For me, I found that gentle downward strokes was the easiest way to start shaping out this piece. The next tool I'm using is the die grinder, which is done in sort of a rowing motion. This is better for stripping back material in a finer, more detailed way. So this helped get some of the finer shaping of the mushroom stem and all its parts. Honestly, this process is so much fun once you get into a flow. It's really interesting to make up the shape of a piece as you go. It made a really nice organic shape and this lovely texture that almost looks like paintbrush strokes, which I really loved. While we're talking aesthetics, let me go a little bit more into detail about the inspiration behind this piece. Nature is a huge theme in most of my art, and I've had a love for mushrooms for quite a few years. I wanted this piece to have all the notable parts of a mushroom without looking like a specific type of mushroom, because I really didn't want to be constrained by real mushroom biology. I wanted this to look like something that could possibly exist, but is also just organic and playful and inspired by a bunch of different things. So I took a lot of creative liberties in terms of proportions and textures. For textures, I used a rotary tool and woodburner to get this fun sort of abstract cork-like texture and this bubbly detailing at the bottom. I spent a good many days working on this detail, and people definitely noticed.
You have great patience.
Oh yeah, thanks.
And now that the stem is mostly done, we're going to hop back to our countertop piece and make our mushroom cap. The most important design aspect for selling the mushroominess, to me, was the mushroom gills. And those are the little flaps on the underside of the mushroom cap where spores get released. I had a lot of ideas for how I could maybe accomplish this look, but I ultimately decided on inlaying 40 plywood pieces on the underside of the countertop, which obviously drove me mildly insane. First, I took a photo of the slab with a ruler so I could scale it into my CAD software as accurately as possible. Then I traced the outline and offset it to get this very nice pocket that perfectly matches the perimeter of the slab. This pocket is going to hold the epoxy, which is going to hold all the gills into place. From there, I used the CNC, and the calibration for this was incredibly meticulous. The CNC operates on the exact same axes and origin point as your CAD file, so I needed a lot of time and a lot of help to rotate and align the slab perfectly on the CNC bed. I did a few test cuts to see how everything lined up before diving in, but eventually I was able to get this perfect little pocket. I could have 100% made my life easier if I just made a simple circle on the underside of the table, but honestly, this is one of those design details that most people may not even notice, but to me, really elevates the quality of the design overall. For the gills, I decided to go with this rounded shape with the notch groove to allow the pieces to fit perfectly into the epoxy pocket and also fan out all the way to the end of the slab. I designed a jig to hold 40 pieces upright, and then after a successful round of test pieces, I had to design the rest of the gills. But because of the unique shape of the piece, I had to make 40 unique files, one for each gill to fit into its exact position. Luckily, having the pocket dimensions in CAD allowed me to get most of my measurements digitally, but I still had to spend several hours in CAD jail just designing each piece one by one. I laser cut these to avoid going full-blown insane by hand cutting them, and they just came out so good. I fit them into place, and they actually all fit surprisingly well. I only had to remake 3 of these, which I was able to hand cut pretty easily on the bandsaw. I settled on this 2-toned red oak plywood to go with the warm color palette and also create this cool color shifting effect as you walk around the piece. I decided to add finish to these before assembly in case it was too hard to paint on when they're all crammed together. Epoxy sticks best to raw, unfinished wood, so I taped over the sections that would actually sit in the epoxy and put a clear finish over the rest. I also used this funky trick I found to create a floating tenon joint to connect the mushroom stem and the cap together. First, I made the connecting tenon, and I lined it up on both pieces. Then I stacked scraps around the tenon, creating a hole for me to route out with the template bit. The template bit has a bearing the same width as its cutter, so the bearing glides along the edge of the desired shape and the cutter removes the material beneath, effectively extending the exact shape downward as you route out the piece. For the top of the mushroom, I used a similar method as before to create a shallow pocket to give the table a little bit of a lip around the outside. This was actually inspired by how certain mushrooms tend to curl up along their edges as they age, and it just felt like a really nice, subtle detail to add to the top of the piece. Now, we're doing the epoxy pour to inlay the plywood gills. I did some quick math to figure out how much epoxy I actually needed, and then I just couldn't procrastinate anymore. There have been a lot of scary and nerve-wracking parts to this build, but this particular epoxy pour was definitely the most anxiety-inducing. I had about 2 liters of epoxy to destroy this build with, and about 2 months of work to ruin. This was a make-or-break moment. I did one last test to make sure everything looked okay, and I still did not feel anywhere close to ready to do this. But sometimes you just have to do it scared. I did the epoxy in batches because I simply did not have a big enough mixing container, and just poured each batch in and slowly shuffled the pieces into place. My biggest worry was epoxy leaking through the piece and having to clean up epoxy soup off my floor. Even though I filled in the cracks from the top side, I had a feeling that these large cracks probably permeated all the way through the piece. And lo and behold, they of course did. The epoxy was squeaking through the tiniest pores in the wood, but luckily I was watching it and I was able to tuck tape over any minor holes relatively easily. Slowly, I was able to fit everything into place, and I was honestly in disbelief at just how well this was going. After it cured, I sat with it and realized that the gills looked a little too round and perfect, so I decided to shape each one with the sander a little differently to give it a more organic feel. And then all that was left was get into the finishing details and actually put it together. I gave the tabletop a good sand to remove the last of the epoxy droplets and tuck tape, and she was ready to do a final coating. I decided on tung oil for the finish because it's a natural oil, it's super durable, and has a relatively matte finish. I started with the stem, which got so much darker than I was expecting, but in all honesty, I should have expected it. After angle grinding, I loved the texture so much that I didn't want to sand it to remove all the strokes, and that left the pores really large and open, allowing oil to get trapped inside. This darkened the piece pretty significantly and made the application a little less even than I was hoping. Learning from that, I sanded the countertop to 320 grit to make it very even and close the pores in the wood. I loved oiling the top of this because the color just was so rich and lovely. The tung oil is done in multiple coats, so I had to apply a thin layer, wipe off the excess, wait 24 hours, lightly sand it, then I could apply the next layer and repeat. It was definitely a time-consuming process, but I really think it was worth it to get such a rich, natural finish. And of course, the cherry offcuts. I turned these into little coasters for the table to look like the little white warts on top of a mushroom, and I even gave it the same little abstract detailing that I did on the stem of the mushroom. And with everything ready, all that was left was to actually glue it together. Putting this together was maybe the biggest thing I've ever done, and these videos in my living room do not do this piece justice at all. So let's fix that, shall we? All my projects are a labor of love, but this project was so different in every way. Normally, my builds start with an idea, which becomes a rough design and then moves to materials as a practical means of physically generating that idea. But by letting the materials guide this entire build, I was able to think so far outside the box and create shapes I never would have come up with on my own. This project is probably my favorite thing I've built. Ever. I honestly can't describe how magic it is to conceive of an idea and bring it to life with my bare hands. Even with all its flaws, I think each part of this table tells the story of everything I've been through over the last few months while I was making it. And I think that's really beautiful. Oh, and I almost forgot one last thing. Thank you, lovelies, so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.